Hello and welcome back to Ambitious. I am very excited for today's guest because today's guest, I am joined by Jazz, and Jazz is someone I have the absolute honor of calling a client, a friend, and truly somebody that I will say I am so insanely inspired by. She has an incredible story that I really was just so excited to share. When I heard it myself, it made me, to be honest, really emotional because it made me really realize what it means to truly seek full, deep, undeniable alignment in your business. And today we're going to be unpacking what alignment in business really looks like. Jazz is going to be sharing the 101 of what it meant to have a business that she blew up on TikTok, to then shutting it down, removing herself from the internet, taking a sabbatical to come back and recreate herself and her business to be truly in alignment. We're going to talk about what to do if you're maybe in a similar situation, how to know if you are actually aligned with your business, and most importantly, what are some of the things that you can do to ensure that as you're creating your business and you're developing it and going to the next level, that you're always in alignment? So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Ambitious. As you heard in the intro, I'm very excited about today's episode because we just did a little while ago an episode about what to do if you are out of love with your business, or maybe even, dare I say, hate your business. And today's guest, as you heard in the intro, has a lot of understanding of business and the behind the scenes of businesses, works with a lot of different industries. And so she is genuinely one of the best people to be able to speak to this, and also has her own journey that I'm really excited for her to dive into. So Jazz, welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to be here. This is amazing. I cannot wait to dive in.
Honestly, I feel like we were just saying before we started pressing record, we could probably go for like 3.5 hours. So we're going to have to, you and I, with our gift of gab, dial it in today to make sure that we stay on course, which for us is not typical. But
yeah, we are certified yappers.
No, 1,000%. 1,000%. You guys should see us when we're in person. Okay, so as a starting point, I would love, because obviously in the aspect of alignment, which by the way, I feel like alignment is a very like goofy word. It's a non-tangible. People are like, I see people talk on social media all the time about alignment, be aligned in your business, be aligned in your life. And you're like, what the heck does that even mean? And so for me, I feel like I define alignment as the ability to feel like everything is in flow and doesn't feel resistant and feels clear. So like you're not doubting your decision. It doesn't feel like everything is 10 times harder. Like you feel like you see what you need to do, you're doing it, and it just in your body doesn't feel resistant. Like it's kind of that like inner knowing when you kind of feel like you need to pick the red shirt over the blue, but you end up somehow picking the blue. Alignment is just trusting your gut, trusting your intuition, and also realizing that in certain situations you might already be in, that if that feeling of resistance is coming up, it could mean you're out of alignment. So I'm curious because obviously you do this a lot with clients, and I know you're going to be sharing your own story today. Like when we're using the word alignment in today's show, what do you want someone to kind of take from that? Or what does that maybe symbolize to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's nuances for every person, but at the core of it, resistance is a great word. I like to think of it like going against the current in a river. Even if you're making progress and you're seeing results, like you're moving, every step feels hard and you feel like you don't want to keep going at some points. Versus when you're in alignment, it's kind of like the opposite. You're flowing with the current of a river. And so sometimes you don't even have to think about moving, you're just moving. And so I think that that's how I like to envision it, is like the people who are out of alignment feel like they're going against the current, and in alignment feel like they're going with. And the current just symbolizes resistance or avoidance or a disdain for the effort that you have to put in. And so it's not that you're not moving, it's just like the way that it feels in the process.
Also, we love a good analogy, so I could not be more obsessed with
I wanted to speak your love language.
I was going to say, I was like, speaking my love language now. Okay, so obviously I so agree with that, and I love the visual as well, because I feel like it's a really easy thing for people to latch onto and an easy explanation. Obviously, you had your own journey, which is why you do this, and kind of like what started or, sparked a lot of the pivot of the work that you do with clients now. Tell me a little bit about kind of like your experience or your journey when it comes to like understanding alignment specifically in business. Because obviously I've seen you grow and develop and have so much even deeper clarity that now than you ever did even when we first started meeting. And like it's been constantly evolving, getting even deeper and deeper and deeper, more specific even as to what alignment specifically looks like for you. And so, yeah, curious if you could just share a little bit about your journey and really how alignment came to be like your purpose.
Yeah. I think that when Kate and I started working together, like when we started working together, I wanted to build a business that I loved because I had came to you feeling like I had built a business successfully, but it didn't feel right and I didn't know why. And I even like went so far as to hire people for like my mindset and all these things and none of it helped. I like 10x my business and felt like I wasn't happy, I wasn't fulfilled, and then I felt guilty for those feelings because I was achieving things that I knew a lot of people wanted. And so when we started together, we had like an initial VIP day and we wrote things on a whiteboard that like looked like an aligned business, but the process I realized wasn't like a logical strategic one. A lot of it is like feeling and going through it emotionally. And so I essentially realized through working together and then in this past, I guess, year, that going through finding alignment in your life and in your business isn't one that gets done on paper or on a whiteboard, or as you always say, like in a Google document, because that's where a lot of us go. You can write out all of the
Yeah.
things that seem like the things you want or what is supposed to be an aligned business or like aligned with your passions and your zone of genius and whatever else you want to give textbook definitions of. But the process was actually extremely emotional and something more in my body and through conversation and mirroring back and reflections and iterations and step by step over time. So I could talk about the whole journey of this past year or two forever, but I think if I could bundle up what it felt like to go through the process, it was the realization that the logic and the strategy, which is I think where you and I and a lot of other entrepreneurs default to, wasn't the process that it actually took. And it was really uncomfortable for that reason because I'm usually the person that can like outthink and out strategize everything, and I couldn't avoid it.
Mm. Yeah, well, I think
Yeah.
like for me, when I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, like they come to you just wanting something different, right? Like, okay, like I just want something different than what I had, different than what I had. Would you say that you knew from the beginning that you weren't aligned to it, or were you just kind of like, yeah, I want to do it a different way, and not really maybe realizing like the root or the depth of what was disconnected for you? Because I feel like for me, there's been moments in my journey where like I went to a coach or hired somebody based off like, yeah, I just want to like kind of like change a couple things, do things a little bit differently. Like I wouldn't have labeled it as I'm not aligned with my business. I'm like I'm massively out of alignment here and I need a massive shift. Like it didn't seem so monumental to me when I searched out support. And so because of that, I think like for myself, I ended up in the same pattern. I had moments where I was like trying to problem solve and work the pieces on a whiteboard or on a Google Doc, only to go deep into the process and realize, oh, it actually wasn't about the fact I wanted a different strategy. It was actually about the fact that I needed a different perspective on myself to then therefore shift into the way that I was doing business. So do you feel when you were doing kind of and initially like say, okay, like I don't feel like I'm excited about my business and I want to do something different. Why do you think your mind went to like, okay, let's change the strategy versus alignment, would you say?
That's a fantastic question. I think that defaulting to changing the strategy is just something that's the common narrative. Like, I honestly don't hear much about what alignment really means or people going through it. Like, people are always just selling the next framework, the next strategy, the next steps. They're going to help you achieve X, Y, and Z. And so I think I just defaulted to like, that's always the answer. And
Mm.
it was hard for it to not be that. So, like, when you asked if I knew that I was out of alignment, I didn't. I remember distinctly months of me crying and then like forcing myself to work and then having a breakdown and crying and being in this cycle and not knowing what it was. And I thought there was something wrong with me. Like, that's all I thought. Like, I didn't think
Mm.
that there was a alignment thing. Like, I didn't know what that was. And I just thought that there was something wrong with myself or something wrong with the strategy of my business. It was like either one or the other. So I would default to like, okay, let's change the strategy. Or like, let's look at myself and see like what's wrong with me because I'm having these breakdowns. I don't know where they're coming from. So I would have never
Mm.
defined it that way before going through the process. And I remember when I came to you, I think I said like, I think I set up my offers in a way where I don't really know what I like. And so I just want to like go back to the drawing board. Like I had no idea this was like a deeper thing. And so there
Yeah.
was a lot of shame and blame too, which I don't know how much of that you experienced as well through the process of just like thinking there's something
Oh,
wrong with us because we're
shame.
feeling things that nobody else talks about.
Well, yeah, and I mean, even you sharing that, just as you were saying, that kind of like light bulb for me because I like at all stages, like I'm not even gonna say that I would say I'm done with it at this point because every stage I feel like at new levels you tap into new comparison and new ideas and new versions of yourself. And my kind of like, I guess I would say awareness came from the fact that I was at an event and I was like to your point, like in my opinion, I was oblivious. Like I genuinely thought like this is I need another funnel, I need another hire, I need another strategy, I need to move around my cash flow and investments. Like I was like not even in the arena of the fact that it was alignment. And I remember being at an event and saying something about my business that I was frustrated with, and someone just saying, literally, I remember the line, it like gives me chills, which was like, what if you just did it your way? And instantly, which I know for most people are like, I don't understand, but instantly I just started crying. And I think it's because of what you mentioned. It was the fact that I had Tuesdays where it was 11 o'clock at night and I was bawling about something in the sense of either, whether you want to call it a breakthrough, a breakdown, whatever. But I was having such an intense emotional reaction. And then for me, at least, I felt like I went on social media and everybody was killing it. And everyone was like, I've never been so happy about my business. Nothing's ever been in so flow for me. And I thought, like, exactly to your point, I was like, oh, this is not a business owner problem. This is not an entrepreneur problem. This is a me problem. So I felt so much shame. And because of that, I didn't want to talk to anybody about it because I was like, okay, well, if I tell somebody, then that means I'm, not doing something right or I need to be worried about it. What if they don't agree? What if they're not experiencing it? And then obviously, which you and I know now, and like some of the female circles and stuff that we all hang out in, there's so many of us that are in this process and yet we feel shame around it even though so many of us are experiencing the exact same thing individually.
100%. I think that I've even realized like the people who like when we like all collectively gather, there's people who are going through it that they don't even realize they're going through it, like those earlier levels of like being unaware. And so they show up and they
Yeah.
ask strategy
Yeah.
questions. And I think like you and I just being only a couple steps ahead in the process can look back and see ourselves in those people. And so
Mhm.
like to your point, like it's a never ending journey, but I have noticed that even the women who are asking strategy questions and are trying to like grow and win, a lot of times are actually experiencing these things without even realizing it.
Mm.
Yeah, if only I knew that so long ago, but there's there's
Yeah, like what would
a
you say
reasoning.
like for you were like the core symptoms, if you will, or like the signs that told you, okay, like obviously, as you said, like I'm having nights where I felt like I was just constantly crying and I couldn't really label it, couldn't really figure out why. Was there other things that came up for you that made you realize, okay, like I really need to revisit this because, you took a step away for a short period of time from your business. And so I feel like there must have been a series of things or maybe something that came up that made you realize, okay, you know what? Like I need to reset here. Like I need to reevaluate what I'm doing.
Yeah. There are so many things that were signs that I didn't even realize for a long time. And even when I took time away, I couldn't even see it because I was still I think people think when if they take a break from their business that like they'll gain clarity, but I was actually just like avoiding and not feeling anything. So the signs
Yeah.
I think now when I look back, the first thing was no matter what I changed about my business, I changed my offers, I changed my title, I changed my whatever else in my messaging, I still felt the same. It didn't feel like any of those strategic changes on the external front changed my internal world. And every iteration felt like I was dancing in a circle and avoiding like the core thing. Like I wasn't feeling like I was gaining clarity or moving forward. It was just like a new thing to try, feeling the same over and over again. That was huge. I think also I was on a vacation with my husband in Costa Rica last year when I was feeling this and I was hitting the highest cash months I had ever made. And throughout that trip in Costa Rica, I was struggling to be present the entire time. It was like a 3-week trip. And I noticed like how much it was affecting my relationship with my husband because I was just not present and I was doing like mental gymnastics in my head constantly and overthinking and ruminating. And then I'd have like these breakdowns on the beach in this beautiful place. And I'm like, okay, something's going on. Like, what the fuck? Is this like mental illness? Like, I don't know what's happening. So
Yeah.
it would
Yeah.
be like in these random moments. It wasn't even just in my business. It was like in the best possible situation, like a dream vacation that we had been looking forward to forever. I still had this weirdness going on. So that was another sign. I think also the difficulty of not being able to see the future anymore. So like if somebody had asked me where I was going in my business, it was like a black wall. That's like the way I described it. And that didn't change until very recently. And I had experienced that for months or even a year where people ask like, what's your plan with your business? And I'm like, I don't fucking know. Don't ask me that. So it was just like a black wall in my head. And I'd actually panic and freak out and be like, maybe I'm just somebody who like lives in the moment and I just like to create all these narratives around it instead of realizing that I couldn't see the future because I wasn't being present in the current or enjoying the current. And so like extrapolating into the future was hard for me because I didn't want more of the same of what was happening now. And so
Mm.
I think those are the few key signs that come up for me. But I'm interested to hear, like in your experience, what were signs that you saw that maybe they're more recent revelations with your new level of awareness that you didn't see were signs in the past?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I was just gonna say too, I think like, even the aspect that you said there of like the narratives that are happening, because I think what also happens with labels is like, say someone says like, oh, I do passive, or I do high ticket, or I'm masculine, or I am in the feminine, or I do XYZ, and like all these labels and boxes. I think there's also this aspect when we're building business, when we tell ourselves like, this is who I am, and that's how I operate, and this is how I think, or these are the moves I make. And then you're getting this sign or you're getting this message internally of like, oh, I kind of feel like I want to go a different way. Kind of feel like I don't know if this is actually me. It's almost like an identity crisis as much as it is a business decision, because you're starting to have to acknowledge that this thing you've programmed yourself to say I am, or that I do, or that I'm going to be is no longer. And I see this a lot actually with women who are going for seven figures and multiple seven figures. I've actually seen time after time people who go for this financial target and then they get closer and closer and they realize, like, I don't even want that. Like, I don't even care about that. I realized I don't even care about the number. I don't care about it looking this way or that way. Like, it's just, that's not important to me. What's important to me is being home with my kids, or what's important to me is travel, or what's important to me is, working 3 hours a day. And like, if I do that and I make multi six figures, I am content. Like, I do not care. And so I think I really love that aspect that you added of the narrative, because I also think sometimes we sort the information that's coming up for us based off of, oh, nope, that doesn't fit this box, so therefore I'm not going to address it. It's a great question about the symptoms. I think for myself, like 100% when you noted I couldn't see the future, I so agree. People be like, so like, where are you going with the business? Like, what are you going to be creating? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I had the mission of what I wanted to do. Like I always knew that I wanted to help women, and like that was not going to change, but what that looked like didn't feel clear. The steps didn't feel clear. And I think most importantly, I started to have massive resentment around things that really typically should have no charge to them. So like, even for me, and it's going to sound really weird, but I'm just going to be really transparent and vulnerable with you guys. I literally remember like wanting more and more and more sales and being like, okay, like the next target again. And then I literally, and my team will test this, I had DMs full of people who wanted to work with me and I didn't want to answer them. Like I was like, I could see them there. I could see them being like, hey, can I learn about your mastermind? Hey, can I learn about your coaching? And they would just sit there for 7 weeks. And like I could see them. I was aware of them, but I didn't want to open them because opening them meant I had to have the conversation to sell them. And to sell them meant I had to serve them. To serve them meant I was staying longer in this business structure that I had that I wasn't excited by. Or I also saw it for myself in launching offers and then killing the launch because I got into it and I was like, no, 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 I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And having that come up a couple times, or having ideas for things that I wanted to do and then backing out and then being like, okay, now I'm ready. And I thought it was all a matter of like, oh, I was mentally exhausted or I wasn't prepped or whatever. What it really came down to was everything that I was procrastinating were really things that frankly I just wasn't passionate about. And I refused to acknowledge that because to me it meant that, to be transparent, I felt like I was giving up. I felt like it was like there's so much opportunity, and I think this is something people struggle with, right? Like even for you, before taking your pause, like for an outside person, they might argue like, how could you take a pause when there was so much momentum and there was so much, movement and energy around your brand and sales and clients coming in and all these things. And for the average person right now who might be listening is like, I don't even have, like, Kate, how could you say you have inquiries and not answer them? What are you talking about? Like, for you, when you were in that moment, how did that feel for you, to feel like you were in like this peak of momentum and that was the moment where you decided like, no, I'm choosing myself and I'm getting recentered?
It was immediate relief and then spiraling. That's what happened,
Mm,
was like I chose myself, which I love that you put it that way, cuz I probably would have never defined it that way. I think there was a lot of shame I felt around taking the break because I knew I was stepping away from what so many people wanted, the inquiries, the sales, the momentum. But to your point, and I heard you say this recently today and it just really resonated. I actually said last year, at the end of last year, I was like, I don't care how much money I make. I can make a quarter, I can make a third, or I can make a fraction of what I'm making. And I just want
yep.
to feel better. Like, that's it. Like, that's all I was saying. But I didn't know how. And so I got really frustrated by trying all the strategies, trying all the changes to my business. And so I literally just took time away because I thought there was no other option. It wasn't like I was choosing it like out of empowerment. It felt like maybe a sense of like giving up or like feeling like nothing was going to change. And so maybe I just need time away.
Mm,
And it was really hard. I literally made a list that week of like part-time jobs that I can get, because I was like, maybe I'm just not meant to be a business owner. Like, I'm just going to go be a part-time
mm,
teacher or like do something else. And so I wouldn't even say it was me choosing myself. It was literally just I wanted to feel relief from the friction and the resistance, and I didn't know what other path there was to fixing it or to go through it, because I didn't even know what was going on. And I really like
mm,
what you mentioned about the labels, because that's something you really helped me with, and I think a lot of clients of mine struggle with this too, is they build their business for a certain amount of time based off of a label with success. Like, I was the TikTok person, and there were other people I know who labeled themselves as the person who's good at X, Y, or Z thing. And they change as people, their
mm,
identity changes, and then they have a crisis because they're no longer connected to the thing that they have a reputation around, have success around, and they don't know how to change it. And so, like you saw with me for months, I would just flip flop between my new identity and the old one, because I felt so comfortable with
mm.
the labels that I knew that they got me a proven result, quote unquote, that being into like stepping into the new identity that was unknown without really labels, that I think it's more like values and beliefs rather than labels. It was hard because those things
Yep.
felt less concrete and more like I can do anything
Mm.
with it. And that was scary as hell.
Well, I'm picturing as you're saying that, I'm like, I don't know why my brain went to like seeing you and seeing like on the left this path, like to your point of like getting to this result, and like you see all these perfectly curated stones that you step on to get to that place, and you can see it at the end of the road. You're like, choose option A, and like this has been successful for you. You have proof of concept. You know this generates sales. You know this works in your marketing. You know it generates this much money. Like, just go this way. It's well lit. There's perfect stones. You can see the end destination. Beautiful. And then to be aligned sometimes means the right path, which has sticks and branches covering it, and you can't see the end of it, and it's not well lit, and there are no stones. And yet you're like, hey, choose alignment. And it's like, duh, the average person struggles with this because, to your point, which I love and I definitely want to dive into, there's a mindset that has to happen to seek to go down that path. Right? Like the natural inclination in us is, if we have proof of concept, our brains are always trying to keep us safe. They're always trying to avoid hurt or upset or resistance. And so it's pretty standard, especially in business, that we would seek to go the path of least resistance, right? Especially when someone's scaling a business, you already have proof of concept of something that's worked. And so then to say, hey, no, you know what? If you want the ultimate experience, potentially, being the main word, you have to go down this path of discovery of alignment and what that looks like for you. And here's the thing, like it's not carved out. You have to create it. And so obviously I know that like this last say 6 months has been a ton of like personal development and mindset work. And as to your point earlier, kind of ended up not like there was strategy pieces, but it really actually ended up being that that was a domino after the discovery of alignment. And so I'm curious, like, obviously you've walked that path on the right with the no stones and the no destination and not well lit. If someone is listening to this and they're like, I'm not aligned and I'm freaking terrified to consider going down that path because I feel like I've already seen the one on the left and it feels like it's much easier and it's already proven. Talk to me a little bit about kind of what you've been experiencing internally or what you feel has maybe been supportive for you to go down in the last couple months that's kind of allowed you to feel more and more clarity unlocking.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. And to think about what helped me continue to take steps on that path rather than like avoiding it or like backtracking, having like a support system has been number one. And that doesn't always have to be like a business coach or whatever. I think just somebody who gets it, like somebody who either has been there or is in the same world as you and can understand what you're going through. That's like the number one thing, because the ultimate difficulty is, like you mentioned, like your body and your mind trying to protect you and keep you safe. And so you will have like these overrides. Like I had these overrides of like overwhelming emotion and overwhelming feeling of fear. Like I would literally, to be transparent, I would literally cry in bed like this year at multiple points and just say, I feel like a failure. Like I feel like a loser, because I felt like I was feeling all these things and going through so much hardship and wasn't seeing like the quote unquote success, conventionally successful things that I was seeing last year. And so I just felt like an absolute failure. And so you're going to have these feelings, like it may not be exactly that, but your own variation of like all of the built up emotions and limiting beliefs. And they could be extremely overwhelming if you don't have somebody to create the space for you to feel them. So that way you can continue to move
Mm,
forward, because that's the only way I was able to continue, was by feeling those things and not avoiding them like I always used to do. So I think that's the first thing. And the second is the emotional regulation and processing. And that's just literally creating space to feel things and not making a story about it and not doing mental gymnastics about what it means about you or your business or the world or your life. And so that's been a huge thing for me too, is like just feeling the things and allowing that and giving myself space to. And whether that's like me doing breath work in the morning and then like crying and then being like, okay, let's go film content, or me having a breakdown or a break or a breakthrough laying in bed, and just like crying
yeah.
about whatever, about the fact that I was feeling stressed the whole week or whatever it was, just like not trying to find the why and just feeling it. Like the emotional processing is another thing that helps you keep going. And these are all like things that feel like they're signs that you're failing, because you're like crying and you're doing all the things that people label as bad, but these are actually the things that help. That's like the
Mm,
first couple that come to mind, is support, emotional processing. I think also a third thing is like creating commitments to yourself. I know we were talking about this recently, but you are probably going to experience shifts in your engagement and your sales and the metrics. And it can be really hard
mhm.
for your body to look at the numbers and not panic or feel like you're making a mistake, because you're going down the unbeaten path and you have to trust yourself over numbers, which can be really hard because you feel like the numbers are concrete and whatever you're feeling is like made up in your head. Like that's how I always felt. And so making like commitments, like I'm going to take these actions, like X, Y, and Z actions for X amount of days, without analyzing, without looking at how it's affecting the bottom line. And then potentially finding new
Yeah.
metrics to define success, whether that's how often you're showing up or the difference in people that you're attracting, like the more qualitative things that you potentially would never really look at because you were always focused on sales. So I think redefining success and sticking to commitments and all of those things help with continuing to chart your own path.
Yeah. I mean, I think like you hit on something massive there, which is like, I think those also two can be connected and they compound when they're connected. Because sometimes when we are in this like dysregulated state and we feel like we're really raw and we feel like we like anything basically tips us off, And then you're like, okay, like I'm going to take that commitment to myself and I'm going to go take that action and, try as much as I can not to look at the outputs in sense of like what it generates is the hardest thing to do. But then when we do, sometimes it's like if you try something new and you're like, okay, like I wasn't aligned to the way that I was doing things, I'm going to try something different. Then you try something different. To some people, depending on the state in which you're looking at it, the thing that happens ends up becoming evidence to you of, oh, see, this was not good. This is not safe. This is not right. Like there's something going on. And I used to have that. I used to have it that if I took a new action and the launch I didn't work out the way that I wanted, I'm like, see, people don't want it, right? Like it was always like me trying and seeking to collect evidence. Or for me, it would be, when, as to your point, when I feel these really intense emotions around like a resistance in my business, I used to be like, oh, that's a sign. Oh, that's a sign. And I feel like even now, like, we've had a lot of conversations about like emotions. And I think we've probably cried a stupid amount of times to each other. Not even about the fact it's interesting, because not even about, I would say, being sad, but just genuinely, like to your point with emotional regulation, like releasing. And I think that the thing that has been for me the most helpful in my kind of navigating that path was number one, like setting the expectation of like you chose to walk down it and you knew there were no lights. Like you chose to walk down and you knew there were no steps and you knew you couldn't see the end destination. So once you're 4 steps in, you don't get to say, oh my God, it's dark. Like you knew that before you started walking. So like I think setting a fair expectation, like when you're trying to find alignment in your business, it's going to be really messy. Like to your point where you're like, I feel like I'm kind of, pivoting. To me, I find pivoting really beautiful because I feel like it's kind of, to me, a matter of like collecting little pieces of evidence along the way of like, that fits, that doesn't fit, a part of that fits, that definitely is not me. And like with all those little pieces of collection, you feel so much more confident when you reach the end of like, okay, like this really feels right. Like this feels like it really is who I am or what I'm supposed to do or who I'm supposed to be. And the thing that I would say for me was like the most impactful 100% was having support in that. And like, yes, of course, like, can you have a coach and all those things? Sure. But I actually feel like what's been the most like insanely healing for me was having other women around me who were going through similar things. Like you and I both know we have a circle of women who are like, it's all on the table. And they're like, I hate this. This is pissing me off about my business. Like they're just so real and raw about what they're navigating. And I think sometimes being witnessed in your transformation, and then most importantly, witnessing others going through the same thing has been so healing because you start to realize like you're not alone. And that shame, I feel like, starts to dissipate. And that, oh my gosh, this is wrong. That's what it means about me. You're like, well, I have 6 or 7 other women who are going through the exact same thing. And I was like a firm believer that I was like in a solo journey until I started to have all of our gatherings, basically, of all of us coming together and telling each other openly and vulnerably what was going on. And the thing I know that you can attest to too is like, it also doesn't have a stage of business. It's not like this milestone of like, once you get here, the constant chase for alignment stops. Like, I think because we're always changing in who we are in our businesses, that what's aligned to us is also changing. So the thing that's really interesting is you're always on the path. Like the path really doesn't have this like you've achieved and you've got here. It's just like this constant discovery, I feel like.
Yeah, I love what you said about like you don't get to go 4 steps in and then complain that there's no lights because that's so valid.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it feels like. It's like you're like, yeah, I'm going to be so confident. I'm going to be brave. I'm going to tackle all these things. And then you take a few steps in, you're like, "Oh my God, this is so scary." And it does feel exactly like
Yeah.
that. And I think what really helped and the biggest accelerator for this process for me was going to your retreat because it's so easy to be in a vacuum online and to not really feel anything because you're on like an hour long call and like we're all scratching the surface and nobody's really witnessing you or seeing like the million other data points of like how you move and your facial expressions and like just being in the moment with you. And so being at the retreat, I was like, oh, this is going to be great for like just getting a little bit more clarity on like my business. And I don't even know what I thought. I think I just like went into it just like being like, this is going to be fun. And then I cried the entire time. So being at a retreat where I was able to be around other women, where we were witnessing each other and seeing each other, because we often do not feel seen in the online world. And a lot of what we put out is curated. Even if we are sharing a hard thing online, it is still curated and we're still filtering ourselves to a certain extent. So like to release all of that and just be able to be seen and supported and witnessed and go through a transformation in person was like the biggest thing and the most helpful thing for me. And I didn't even realize that I needed it or what would happen. It kind of just like unfolded the way it was meant to, I think.
Well, because like you and I feel like, well, we connect on a million and one things, but I feel like one of the things that we connect on is the fact that both of us were very like self-proclaimed, like masculine strategy nerds who like love structure. And like, guys, she has a background in engineering. Like, she's literally physically wired this way, right? And so even with you mentioning that, because I've shared in other episodes, you know, my perspective on kind of like how I started to tap into this area. Someone listening to this who's like deep in strategy, she's somebody who's like, I want to scale and I want to go for these big milestones. And these girls are on this podcast right now telling me to cry in front of a group of other people I don't know. This sounds like, nope, I'm not interested. I think about old Kate and like her hearing that would be like, these people are so foofy. And like, this does not resonate with me, would have been my old perspective until I had put myself in those environments. And like, obviously, like yourself, like you go to a lot of retreats just like I do. We both go to a lot of coaching events and conferences. And the thing that I will say is like, it's interesting now because I actually desire it. I don't know if you've gone to this place yet, but like I feel like I kind of crave it. Like I kind of want to go release. I want to go be in those safe spaces because it's kind of like in anything. Like when you feel like you're just super frustrated and you're feeling resistant or you're feeling pent up, and then you're like, I just need to like release this. It feels like there's like this kind of buildup of energy in me. And then you cry or then you go do whatever and you instantly feel this calm. Like that's how I feel when I'm around other people who experience the same thing. But I can so see the person listening being like, okay, so Jazz is telling me to go get in a room of other women and cry. This does not sound like a good plan or a good idea. Talk me through maybe how your relationship with that emotional regulation side of things has changed. Because I would hazard to guess, probably typically before this whole world, you probably weren't going to be the first person to jump in and say, hey, let's cry together. Because again, to your point, which we've talked about, you know, crying is usually associated with something negative is happening. And I think the rewiring of the relationship to releasing and emotional regulation, myself, I agree with you, has been such a big part of my journey. But like, what was that like for you going from that masculine belief of like, you know, crying means something's wrong to now learning how to emotionally regulate and not involving crying?
Yeah, I think my answer is a little bit convoluted or complicated because there's like so much that went into my perspective on it. Like I grew up in immigrant family, Middle Eastern family, and so if anybody knows, that's like a one of the cultures where like emotions are just like not a thing, and if somebody feels them, it's like ignored, or they think that there's something like going on, it's just kind of avoided. And that's fine. Like my parents, I love them very much, but I think the environment was because I would grow up and I would feel all these feelings. It was just kind of like shoved aside, or I felt like villainized maybe for having a feeling. And so I had all these labels and these things that I carried around what it meant to have an emotion or to express it to other people. And then later in my life, I got really passionate about learning about emotions. And so I read a lot of personal development books. I think a lot of first generation Americans go through this where I know a lot of my cousins, like especially the oldest daughters of all of them, they go through this thing of like, okay, I feel like there's so much weight I carried in my life and I want to like learn more about myself. So you like go on this personal development journey, you read about all the different things related to mindset and emotions. And I thought that made me emotionally intelligent or like be able to process emotions better. But all it did was give me the tools and the language to do mental gymnastics around my feelings. And so I would like have all these labels and have all these things that would pop up in my head when I had an emotion. And I would turn it into like this spun story in my head, or like think I was being really self-aware because I was thinking about it, but thinking about it is different than feeling it. And I didn't know that. And so
Mm.
I think that if I had like listened to myself now a couple of years ago, I would have thought that I was doing it right. And I would be so confused about what I'm talking about now, or just think like, what kind of woo-woo path is Jasmine on? Like what the hell is she talking about? Because I also valued logic and strategy and intelligence over everything, because that's also the environment I grew up in, where like that was the elite form or
Yeah.
the elite quality. So I think that it's hard to, I still have that voice in my head sometimes of like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, is this even worth spending time on and explaining or working with other people on? And the evidence that every time that it is worth it is just how different I feel, how different my relationships are, how different I operate, how much my energy has changed. Like my husband the other day was telling me, like, I feel like your light is back. And that just made me cry because I didn't realize it was gone. It was just, I was living in my head and so disconnected.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a weird thing to look at from a past version of myself, but a lot of it you only really start to understand when you kind of like rip the band-aid off and start taking little steps, and you realize there's like so much to uncover, and it's you have to feel it to understand it.
And I love that you noted that, because I think that one of the things that I was like not ready for was the fact that alignment was to be centered, to be like, if you think about literally like two pieces aligning, like clicking together, all the pieces have to be in place for that to happen, in the sense of like all pieces have to shift. Like it's a domino effect of like, if you move one piece, the other pieces move as well. And I think what I realized was like, for me, when I started to get more aligned in the way I was doing business, and, seeing what I wanted to do with my offers and seeing what I wanted to do with marketing, and, for some tangible examples, like I realized like alignment for me, I really didn't love a certain way that I was being taught to scale programs. And like, it was like taught that like, you're nowhere to be found, you don't have access to clients, like you're not anywhere. And like, obviously, if you guys have heard me talk in past episodes, like I have private clients, which is considered the no of business coaches, because you're trading time for money and blah, 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 blah. But I was like, my heart loves that. Like, I love doing it. It literally lights me up. So I was so conflicted, because I was like, I'm told it's not the right way. And yet this is what I want to do. Or for example, like it might have been marketing wise. I was really being so curated in marketing, really what I thought was from the lens, again, strategy brain, of like, oh, this is the right thing. And like, it's getting the outcomes, it's getting the sales, and it was getting us great results to get scaled our company. But like, I felt like sometimes I looked at my feed and I'm like, I don't even know who that is. Like, I don't need, that's not me. Like, it's part of me. It's a subsection of me, but it didn't feel like the full essence of me. And it was interesting because we had a retreat in Toronto, actually, which is where that came up. And I realized, like, one of my clients, it was interesting. One of my clients had said to me, like, oh, like, you just don't seem like you ever have like a bad day. Like, you don't really seem like you have like you don't struggle, like you don't seem like you ever struggle with a sale. You don't really ever struggle with marketing. Like, you probably don't have mindset issues. You don't really have comparison. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so I started to realize, I was like, people literally think I don't poop. Like, people
I
literally
was
think that
going to
I'm just
say
like
that.
not normal. People think I'm not normal. And I was like, but that's my responsibility. It's like the fact that like there's this image, and I'm going to be honest, that the lack of alignment, and therefore like the breakdowns and all of that, where that came from was the fact that I had built my business in such a structure of what was successful, that when it was so hard for me to do, I had to maintain it to maintain the results, even though that wasn't entirely fully to my core me. So for example, if I was like for example, a year from, not even a year, 9 months ago, Kate would never fathom recording a podcast in a sweatsuit. Is it still neutral? Yes, it's still on brand. But other than that, I would never fathom it. I would never even consider it. And, even crying in front of clients, I would have previously seen that to be like, oh, that's weak. That's not okay. And I love what you added about the connection with your husband, because I have also seen alignment in my business create that domino in other parts of my life. Like, I've never been so clear and open and connected with the close people in my circle and some of my closest friends. I've never been so connected in relationships and with family. Like, there's been this domino that it's kind of like when I shifted the pieces, I couldn't help but the almost like backlash in a positive way that had on the other parts of my life. And so I love that you mentioned that, because I think something that many people don't recognize is when you're out of alignment, really it starts with you, to your point. Your energy changes, your perspective changes, your behavior changes. And so because you change, your reality in every bucket changes as well.
Yep, 100%. And I think that that is because business is usually a manifestation of a lot of the things that already exist. And so it's like a huge mirror. Just like I think when people have kids, it's a big mirror for them of like their patterns and their beliefs because their kids mirror it back to them. I think business does the same for people in that where you are at and who you are will be mirrored back in the business you create. And I think because people think business is for others or this like strategic thing that can be formulated, that won't happen. Or if something's wrong, it's a formula problem. But it almost always is the fact that it's just mirroring back something that's existing, and it's existing probably in all areas of your life because it is all connected, to your point. And so I think a part of it too, to go to your point of like being curated online and like looking like you don't poop, which like if you don't look like you poop online, then let's have a conversation. But it's really it's really about being like, I think, okay, so the way I would love to explain it is something I realized this past year is I think when people come across like they have it all together online, and I don't know if you experience this, but business coaches who like to look like they have like all the pieces together, sometimes it attracts people who idolize you and then put you on a pedestal to like save them because you're not positioning yourself as somebody who is figuring it out also. It's like I have the answers. And I've gone through this as well. Is like I positioned myself of like somebody who like had all the answers and didn't make it look like I struggled with marketing or sales or any of the things. And so I think I inadvertently created this relationship with other people that like I can save their business and I can save them. And that really like disempowers the person. It creates like a weird relationship with your clients. And I also saw that was mirrored in how I was investing and like investing in people and idolizing them instead of like now I've completely shifted how I see it, like being teammates. And it's been so much more empowering to like see that shift. And so like a lot of my clients struggle when they come to me to like be more authentic about the struggles they're experiencing, the challenges they have, because they're like, that completely diminishes my authority. Like authority is like that buzzword that everybody wants online. They want to be an authority figure. And so they think that means showing the ways that you kill it and that you're amazing and not seeming like you have bad days or struggles, which like I thought it was like that too. But in reality, the best people who like actually build authority in the way that you see them as somebody that inspires you rather than can save you are the people who share their struggles and can say, I've been there and I have to constantly work at this. And so that's why I understand and I want to support you in doing that rather than save you because I have these magic answers. And so I think the way that you show up completely changes the way that people see you, your relationships, the clients, and the business. And it's a really common thing I see across coaching and the online world in general.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you note that, because like for me, I agree. I think my belief used to be like, I don't poop, and that's just what it is. Like I was just like, no one can know I poop. No, I was definitely of the mindset that like I had to be on. Like I was someone that people were looking up to. I was someone that had to have the answers. I was somebody who had to never struggle and never cry and never have issues and never XYZ. That was like deeply ingrained, that people were not going to hire me if I had a resistance, or people weren't gonna, whatever it might be. And I think one of the initial pieces that broke that for me was when I shared with like my innermost circle that my engagement was no longer. And with that circle, it was people who were very close to me and like literally best friends, but also people who were clients. Like, and even just seeing the way that my clients had received that. And it wasn't this aspect of, you know, seeing me as weak or seeing me as broken or seeing me as like, oh, do you need a break? Do you want to step away from coaching? Like that wasn't even, I was so skewed about what the response was going to be. And so to have the response from people be, almost like, wow, that's so inspiring that you've been showing up this entire time, even with XYZ happening. Like, that's really inspiring to us to show that, hey, what we're navigating, we can keep going. And now, kind of my perspective around authority is like, for me, and even with some of the mentors that I've hired, like, I've actually hired them because of their vulnerability. I've hired them because of their quote unquote flaws, if you will, of what they perceive to be their flaws in the moment. And so for me, I really have reevaluated authority to really be the ability for someone to continue to persevere, not in the absence of resistance, but in the presence of resistance. Like, it's like the, someone killing it and, crushing it with certain milestones or making money or whatever it might be. In a way, I'm like, okay, well, like, if your life is a fairy tale, that's great. And like, while technically for 30 seconds when you're scrolling on TikTok, that feels good. The reality is when you're in it, you want a coach or you want a friend or you want a support system that gets it, not just in the highs, but also in the lows. And so for me, it's changed the way that I invested as well, because like I am both of us, both of us very familiar with George's crying at the retreat. Like, he's a very emotionally expressive person. And again, it's like, hey, if he feels something, you're going to know it and he's going to express it. But the thing that actually taught me in our mentorship was like seeing him cry for the first time made me wildly uncomfortable, like wildly. Like, I was like, I gotta get out of here because
You're
I
like,
didn't
can I
know
get
how
a
to
refund?
handle it. I was like, this person's supposed to be, yeah, like supposed to be the authority, supposed to be the person who's like got it all together. But then when all the judgment and the stories started to dwindle away, I was like, whoa, this person's human, like super successful, has built billion-dollar companies, but is also just human and is experiencing resistance or is experiencing, overwhelm or imposter syndrome, just like all of us. And I feel like more than it was a disconnection of people don't want to hire me for that reason, people don't want to work with me, I feel like it was actually the opposite. It brings people so much closer to you, realizing how real and connected you really are because your lives are much more similar in your experience of them, even though the outcome is different. I think that's what gets me inspired now is like, we're going through the same things, but this person I'm hiring is getting different outcomes in the same reality. So again, kind of back to our paths, we're both on the same path, but they're experiencing it in a much lighter way than I am. And now I'm curious to learn how they're doing that. And so I feel like it shifted 100% for me as well in like how I was investing and also how I was understanding like what I wanted to be around to really figure out how I wanted to do business.
Yeah. And also, like to your point around George, like setting a precedent for like expressing emotions, that like translates so much to business and clients because like if you have a client tell you, as you mentioned, that you seems like you don't have a bad day and you just like, you don't struggle with this and this and this, it probably defaults to them, because I experienced this too, asking strategy questions only constantly because they think, well, if Jasmine or if Kate or whoever else at that level is focused on the strategy and like we don't show them first to like make them feel seen or create the emotion as
Mhm.
part of the conversation, that the conversation would consistently go back to strategy and like the business steps. When, as you've probably seen it with myself now with my clients, like I'll tell them, hey, like this is how I'm feeling, I've been like struggling with this, I kind of like I'm working through this is what I've been going through. And the chat in our group will blow up with all of them being like, oh my God, I feel this way too. Or I just went through this. Or like, can you tell me more about it? And it's like the most engagement in my coaching that I see is when I open up the door and I talk about all the things that are allowed. Because I think when we don't do that
Mhm.
first, a lot of people think that that's not the direction they should be focusing on. And so they just default to the strategy. They're like, okay, that's what everybody talks about. Clearly, like you've made this money, you've been successful with strategy, so like that's where they will default in the conversation, and it doesn't create the allowingness, the willingness, the permission for it to go in that direction. And there were times where I realized like a client will be like, I had a client who was making like 6 figures per month and she was like on the verge of burning it all down. And she like called me on my phone, which like usually she'll never do. And she's like, hey, I just need to ask like if you've ever felt this way. And I'm like, no fucking shit, I felt that way. And I realized I wasn't sharing it because I thought it would weaken myself. But all it did was take away that option of that being a conversation off the table. And so over time, I realized a
Yeah.
lot of my clients were asking me questions based off of strategy. And if I actually went deeper, like for instance, one of my clients was asking me about going live on TikTok and like how to do it in a way that like calls in the right people and like can make sales while going live on TikTok. Cause I think people are always talking about making sales live. And when I was asking her questions, what ended up happening was she was opening up about the fact that she's afraid to be seen because of certain things in her past. And she was like, I don't know who's going to come on my live. I don't know who's going to pop up and what questions they're going to ask. It makes me feel really uncomfortable.
Mm.
And so it was actually all of that stuff. It wasn't like a strategy question. And so a lot of times when people ask a question, it's not 100% rooted in strategy. Like they can probably Google a lot of the answers or figure it out themselves. And I think coaches get frustrated because they're like, why is somebody asking me this? Like they know the answer to this, but there's probably deeper things going on. And we haven't created the safety or the permission for that to be part of the conversation or be a valid question to ask in the first place. And so that was a big shift I had to make this year.
Yeah. I mean, I think that many times there's strategy changes, obviously, as we know, like both of us live in the strategy bucket with people. And there's a lot of things that in marketing and sales and offers and all of that can be refined 100%. But you know, it's been really interesting because for me, I was having the clarity. I was like, again, like some of the core tools I would say was starting to like question my beliefs and ask like where did they come from and where were these perspectives and beliefs and values that I had ultimately built my business based off of. So I started to evaluate those. I started to really look at emotional regulation, which was when I was having resistance, realizing that pushing it down was only making it worse. And so because of that, the whole idea of like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I don't know why I'm crying. Those moments, while haha funny and me joking around, you know, oh, I'm so like, I don't know why I'm crying and almost making it weird that I was upset were further reinforcing that me feeling and experiencing emotions were odd and therefore again creating a narrative and a story around that when they came up again. But I think in the business bucket, and I was curious as to your kind of thoughts on this. I feel like when I was out of alignment, I was like, F this. I'm not doing it this way. And I was going to bolt to the other side. Like, I was really in the very strategy bucket. And I was okay, like, I have these certain offers. If I was high ticket, I'm like, I'm going to go the other side. I'm going to build out a membership. And like, obviously, as you guys listen to this, I don't have a membership. So you know how that went down. But basically, I had, you know, these clarity pieces of like, I'm going to do a course, I'm going to do a membership. And like, keep in mind, guys, like I've told you over and over again, like I really love high touch point and high ticket. And so it was very like, if I don't want to feel this way, I got to get out of the feeling. And I also, therefore, got to get out of the structure that caused this feeling to occur. But what ended up happening is over this process, which right now I would say I'm probably about 9 months into like really deep discovery of making my business even more aligned. And I'm not necessarily in the friction piece of it anymore. But what I've realized is like I kind of had to go from one extreme to the other extreme to then recenter to the middle and be like, okay, like this feels like home. And it was really like a hybrid of what I was doing before and some of the new ideas that I have. But it was interesting because it really strategically hasn't been like, I thought it would be this like huge, monumental, total new business. To your point earlier, burn it to the ground, start over. Like, I think when we think alignment, we think about, which I, again, when I was kind of having this smack in the face if I wasn't aligned, that's why I started crying because I thought I saw all the work that had to be done or that I thought had to be done in the path in front of me. When really it wasn't as much of the work in the business because the offers have pretty well stayed the same. I've made some adjustments when it comes to marketing. Like they're very small tweaks, yet I've never felt so aligned in my business as I do today. And so I'm curious for you, like that evolution from I don't love it, like how do you feel you kind of experienced getting to center?
Yeah. And I want to note one of the most brilliant things you've said, which I mean, the list of brilliant things you said is a million miles long, but saying like the constant recalibration has been so accurate to what it feels like. And you also gave an analogy to like a swinging pendulum is like when you lift a ball on a pendulum and you release it, it'll have like these big drastic swings back and forth at first until it just like has small swings trying to find center. And that's what business feels like. I think a lot of people feel like if they're out of alignment or they hate things or they're not feeling good, that they have to go back to the drawing board, burn it all to the ground, which is literally what I did. And it only made matters worse because now I like removed all the mirrors and it feels like I was starting from scratch instead of taking iterative action on the foundation I've built. And so it becomes a lot harder when you try to reinvent the wheel. And sometimes you have to maybe go through your own version of that to like find your center. But it's really hard to build it from your brain. You have to take the messy action, realize what doesn't feel good, and you will probably come back to some semblance of what you originally had with nuances in how you execute. And so it brings me back to a book I was given at one of our retreats, the 10x is easier than 2x, where I think a big part of it is talking about it's not about doing more work or doing things, quote unquote, a completely different way. It's usually just the steps that we were taking them differently. And it's about who we are being in the process and how we are doing things and how we hit the notes instead of completely changing the song. So I think that a lot of people think when they want to find alignment or they want to build something that feels different, that they have to reinvent the wheel, like you mentioned for yourself, but for myself too. You've seen me think I have to reinvent everything about myself when I've come back to some semblance of what I've always had, just with slight differences in the identity of what it looks like and what it feels like, and the nuances and subtleties that feel a little bit more aligned with myself. And it is a longer process. And I think people feel better with the idea of scratching things and restarting, because it's like they can just get rid of everything that doesn't feel good and you could just like throw it all away. But then you'll look around and be like, wait, I don't even know where to go now because I have nothing to work with. When in reality, it's probably not the entire structure. It's just like, it's like instead of tearing down the entire house, you probably just need to like paint the walls a different color and like change some of the furniture.
Yeah. Yeah. And I realized that like even for me, it was less about the evaluation of the pieces and then also more a matter of seeing how those pieces made me feel. So like if it's like, you know, for me, I total transparency had, you know, co-coaches and stuff like that, and I had moments in my business where I wasn't as deep in my offers as I am now. And what I realized was like I thrive off of being like, which I know as I say this, people are gonna be like, Kate, you're so weird. But I thrive off of being on Zoom. Like I love being on calls. I love being behind the curtain of people's businesses. Like, and the idea of as I scale, which was like my old kind of, you know, motto, which was like scale up, pull yourself out of this, pull yourself out of that. I really needed to give myself the permission to say, like, listen, if there's like this subsection of your business that you really fucking love, stay in it. Like, that's your choice. It's yours. You're making it. Right. So I think the thing that also has really helped me was realizing, like, I feel like I knew this, but I just needed the reminder really aggressively because I was so deep in the weeds of everything, was to realize that, like, there really isn't a right way. Like there's ways that have data connected to them to say like, hey, this has worked for XYZ people, X percentage of people who do this see a lot of success with it. But I also, again, see like that as the left path. And it's like, if you decide to carve your own way of like your offers work a certain way because that's what feels good to you, or you sell a certain way because that's what feels good to you, at the end of the day, it's your business. And I think the thing that has been a big word that I know both of us have shared, like in our conversations, both in my own journey and your journey, is this word of permission. Because I think sometimes when we have so many narratives of like, this is business and this is business and this is a mastermind, and this is a course and this is how it's done. You're like, okay, got it, got it, got it. And you go, go, go. But you never really take a second to be like, do I like this? Like, does this feel good to me? Because even though it might get outcomes, it may not feel right. And so sometimes when someone just goes, yeah, that's okay. Like if you don't want to do A, B, and C, like you could do that. And again, that moment for me of that question of what if you did it your way that was asked at 11 o'clock at night at a conference, I did not know that was going to be like my pivotal, like, type moment. And yet that's when it all broke in my brain. I'd never even allowed myself the opportunity to consider, wait a second, what if I just said, screw what's right, screw what XYZ is doing, or this person tells me, or this mentor says? Like, what if I just was like, here's what feels good? I'm going to explore that. Not even say I'm going to do it, but I'm going to explore it. And I think that word of permission has been huge. And I, again, to your point earlier, I feel like I needed this from a mentor. I needed to hear it from somebody else outside of myself to kind of give myself that like inner validation of like, trust your gut, trust your gut. And even being around someone like yourself and seeing you put this into practice as well was like testament to the fact of other people embodying these values of do it your way, do it your way. And I feel like when you get enough of a momentum, and to your point earlier, a support system, they kind of let you borrow their confidence in permission while you build your own. And that's really how I see it, is like the people that I've hired or the people I have in my surroundings, when I don't feel right, when I don't feel confident, have been my support system that gives me the power to like, okay, like stay the course, trust yourself. And like, obviously, you guys have even done that in personal buckets, right? Like, I'm starting a whole new chapter of my life of what technically maybe some people would say is like getting more aligned and the pieces are starting to move together. But like, do I feel aligned right now? Yet, no, because it's just like, it's so messy to me. I'm so in that discovery, but I've borrowed the confidence of people who have the confidence in me. And so, I'm curious for you, like, how much of this was permission for you? Like, do you feel like you always kind of knew, but you were just like, I just need someone to tell me it's okay? Or do you feel like it was just really a discovery thing of like, I didn't even know?
Yeah, emotions are coming up while you say that, 'cause that really hits home. Absolutely was like always there, and I needed the permission, I think, and I got to have the permission by being in like the circles or in the world with people who are connecting more with people who don't have the structures and the boxes, and allowing me to be me and seeing me and validating that the things that they saw. Like, I think so many business owners like are they're missing out on a huge thing of like not being seen because they're being told to do things other people's ways. And so like the confidence gets kind of like dwindled because I see this all the time. They are being told to do it somebody else's way. And so they don't feel like they've been given the permission to be themselves, given the permission to do things the way they want to do it. And previously very confident people lose their confidence in the process. Even it only takes like a year of that in business for it to be completely like hard for them to make a move without the permission. And I definitely felt that. I think also a part of me knew that I wanted to help people with something that wasn't 100% a hard skill and more on the softer side. And growing up in the environment I grew up in, where like if you were good at math and science or a brainiac or good at school, like you were the ultimate child or person, I didn't realize the value of what I was doing. I thought I was doing it because I felt like I needed it, not because it was valuable to the world. And I think I had a shame that something was wrong with me. And so I needed this thing that wasn't actually like good to need. When I realized that being in these past few months together, that like the confidence and the permission and being seen and all of those things, and seeing how helpful it is not only for myself but other people going through similar processes, has been huge. And I didn't have that confidence when I first made the choices, and so that's why I like wavered so much in sticking to it. And so I love your term borrowing confidence, because that's really what it was. And the ability to be seen for who I am for the first time was huge too. And so I think that's a lot what a lot of people are struggling with is they're like born as these unique human beings, and they have these unique gifts and this mission, and they start the business with like this thing that they want to share with others, and they're like so passionate about this unique thing, and it just gets put into a box, and then the color comes out of it and it's just black and white, and it's another variation of like all the other things in that niche or every other way people are doing it. And then they become really disconnected, and they lose the confidence, and they wonder what they're doing because that spark and that uniqueness that they started with is not there anymore. And
Mm.
so I think it's all connected in a way, but the borrowing confidence has been huge. And I also realize now that like when I was doing content strategy for people last year, which, my business has changed, a lot of what I was doing wasn't even content strategy. Like I would give them strategy on modules and stuff, and then I'd be on calls. And what I would do is like tell them what I saw that made them different. And I'd be like, oh, client X, Y, and Z, like you're saying these things, and then you put out this content, and it's like so like everybody else, but then you're sitting here with this sense of humor, with this unique perspective, and like none of it is online. And so that's why so many of them were able to like multiply online, was not because I had like this special formula, was because I gave them permission and it let them borrow my confidence in them, and then also saw them for who they are, and
Yeah.
allowed that to be translated into their brands, because that's really what builds real personal brands, is being yourself. So as floofy
I
as that
love that.
sounds, but yeah. Be
I have
yourself.
a little bit of a pivot question.
Yeah.
So I feel like obviously, in knowing you and your journey and all of the pieces, I'm thinking back to, I don't know why, and you guys always hear me joke about this, and also if this is your name, hi, but I have an avatar named Sarah. Don't ask me why her name's Sarah. Years ago, I decided her name was Sarah, and that's just what it's been ever since. So if you're Sarah, hello. But if you're like a Sarah, for example, who is out of alignment with her business. She's like, okay, like these give me some things to consider. I have to consider my perspective around how I'm envisioning the path. I need to consider, the strategies that I'm taking, consider getting that support system, really start to get those tools in my toolbox for self-regulation. Jazz, you're now really just like myself. I wouldn't say I am on the other side because, again, I think it's constantly a work in development. But I feel like we are so leaps and bounds on the other side of, if we were thinking about the two sides of like non-aligned and lined. I feel like it's a constant discovery. So I don't want to say it's done, but I feel like we've like leaps and bounds from where I once was. I'm curious for the woman who's feeling right now listening to this, like she kind of knows her business is just not clicking and she wants to feel aligned, but she's like, how will I know that I've gotten there? Like, how will I know that I've really unlocked, yeah, this is me. Like this feels good. Like when you tap into who you are now and how you feel now compared to how you used to feel, what does it feel like when you're kind of in the zone of being fully aligned in your business? Like, how would you say that what's the contrast? What's the after state if you could describe it for someone who's really just feeling like she needs to tap into that to borrow a little bit of your confidence right now because she might not feel like she has it like in this moment?
Yeah. I think my answer might be limited because I truly have only felt more aligned within the last month since the last retreat we went on. Because before that, I was like, feeling a lot of after effects and like things I had to go through. But how I feel now is I think it's even evident in how I ask questions. So, like, I don't know if whoever's listening may feel called out, but even as a client, like to Kate or to mentors, I would ask questions that would take like minutes to ask. And I would go around in circles and then say, I know, I'm sorry, I'm taking so long. And then I have this thing. And I didn't trust myself to even ask a question, let alone execute. And it was really evident in the way that I asked questions. And so if I listened back, I didn't even want to hear what I sent because I'm like, that just sounded like a vomit of all of the ways in which I already doubted myself before I can even ask a simple question about marketing or whatever it was. And I think now, it's not to say I'm perfect. Like I do send long voice notes, but I do feel like when I send them, it's just because I like to talk, not because I'm like spiraling. And so instead of feeling like a torpedo, I feel a little bit more uh like less spinning and more straight in the way that I communicate. And even something as small as that affects so much because it's a manifestation of my internal world. So like not only when I ask questions that way, but when I created content or made a decision, it was very like spiraling and back and forth and not confident and taking two steps forward, one step back, and kind of like not being able to stick to consistent action. Whereas now I feel that I'm able to take actions without making it a story, making it proof that something's not right, making it evidence that I'm not good enough. I'm able to just like take the steps now and be able to like outline what I need to do and stick to it instead of creating all the narratives and jumping to not knowing anything and jumping to labels and shame and connecting myself to every step. I also noticed that a big thing is when I was really out of alignment, I used to like hyperfixate on like what things were supposed to look like. And I insisted that every action and every input needed to have a certain output. And I insisted that every part of my business needed to look a certain way. And so I'd fixate on like step 100 instead of even like taking step 1 or 2. Whereas now I can see that I'm just like taking the steps and like whatever happens out of it, I will deal with it when it comes. Instead of like, I need to reinvent all my offers. Now I'm like, okay, let's just like market ourselves and like sell and like evaluate as we go. And then if the marketing isn't getting the results, let's just like go back to the drawing board instead of uh enveloping everything together and like making it a story and trying to look years down in the future and like see if it's the actual thing I'm supposed to do, which I think people think seeking alignment is that, when it's actually, when you're aligned, you're just like taking the steps you need to take every day to move the needle forward and regulating yourself and moving like just 0.01% every day and then like seeing what happens, which is like the opposite of what I think people envision it as.
There is a huge piece of this, which is like I really think that there's this aspect, the huge overarching piece to me is this aspect of trust. Like it's a trust in yourself. It's a trust in the process, it's a trust in the path, it's a trust in yourself to figure it out. It's a trust in yourself of if it doesn't feel right, you'll navigate it. If it does feel right, you'll feel it. It's a trust in the feelings that are coming up right now. It's a trust that you might actually know what's better for your business than someone else who tells you this is the right way for your business, which I know for a lot of people is very confusing because they're like, well, then why would I hire a mentor? The thing that I was going to say, because you mentioned it earlier about, discovery of these pieces, is I think the other thing is too, when you mentioned that you are enough, you help people to realize that they are enough in the way they are and that that's enough to market. That's enough for their offer. That's enough for their brand. And that it's not about becoming somebody else or being something else. The thing that I also want to note, which I know you're very aware of as well, is that there's a big section of the industry that really benefits from telling us that we're not enough and having us being convinced we're not enough. Right. And so I think, obviously for both of us being business mentors, the thing that I think is really important is that we recognize that like the mentor's job is not to fix you. Right. It's and I love you guys hear me talk about this in other episodes, and I just love it because it sparked when you shared it of like the mirror. Like I find my clients even are a mirror for me in the areas of improvement for myself. I am a mirror for some other people in their world, right? Or my mentors are a mirror for me. Like we really are, the goal of a mentor should be to help you to see what's already in the mirror because you just have a distorted view of it, not because I need to change who's in front of it. And so I think I just really wanted to highlight that because I think it's really important for people who say, well, but I'm not enough, right? Like I'm consuming so-and-so on the internet and they're here and they're doing this and they're hitting these milestones and they've got the big following and they've got the big sales. Like clearly I'm not enough because if I was enough, I would do that or be that or have that. And what I've realized is like, it's actually not about you becoming someone different, but actually realizing who the hell you are that is actually the difference maker in you achieving that or having any of those things that you ultimately desire. But you have to recognize that when you do get that support, you have to make sure that it's not to the point of someone actually benefiting from you being broken. Like, it's not the idea of like, hey, you're not enough until you work with me. It's like, hey, you are enough right now, but I really want to help you to like see that and experience that and embody that. Do you want to take that journey with me? And so I just wanted to kind of add that distinction because I think sometimes even for myself in chapters in business, like I felt like I'm not enough unless I have what this mentor has in their toolbox. And then come to find out, we all actually have the same toolbox. We just have different understandings of how the manual works. And so I think it really is it just an important piece because if you're at a place, and I feel like Jazz, you probably would agree with this, if you're at a place of lack of alignment in your business, you have to actually be very careful because you're very open, right? You're open and receptive to new ideas. You're open and receptive to new strategies. You're open and receptive to like, okay, like show me the way, show me the way, show me the way. And so back to those two paths again, if we have a person who says, hey, come with me, I have this path, it's perfectly lit. It's not the option A or option B. I have option C over here, and this is what you can do, and it's well lit, and this is what it looks like, and everyone goes down it, and it's much easier. It can feel really easy, right? To have somebody say, like, this is the way. Because all you're looking for in those moments of alignment is like, just tell me, just tell me, just tell me. And I think one of the things that, both of us have experienced is like, sometimes the best transformation hasn't actually been from someone telling you the right answer. It's from them letting you sit and helping you to discover what your answer was. And again, to your point earlier, that's not the answer that most people want to hear on this podcast. They're like, no, just give me the freaking blueprint, right? But that's a blueprint that's only going to last you 60, 90 days. If you want to be in business for the next 6 to 9 years or 60 years, whatever it may be, pass it down a generation if you want to, it's going to really require you to understand it at a much deeper level and not take over someone else's belief of what's right for you, but you actually understand your own. So I just really wanted to add that because when you said that earlier, I feel like that really just landed for me and started to get me going on, how I've really been selective about making sure when I'm not in alignment that I'm also conscious of how vulnerable I am in those moments and being really cautious about who I surround myself with and what their advice is in the pursuit of discovering what's right for me.
Yeah, that was bars, Kate. That was I was like, I
Thanks,
said some of
dude.
that stuff. That's crazy. That was so good. You're
You
like, to your
did.
point
You
earlier,
did.
and I'm like, what fucking point? Because that was so good. Anyway, I was going to say too that I think that there's a narrative that you touched on perfectly and eloquently. I might be a little bit more blunt, but I've seen in the business mentorship world, people ask like, how do I scale like you did? How do I get the results that you got? And I see coaches say, you hire me. And I'm like, that's kind of crazy that that's a response, because that's not totally the long-term sustainable option like you mentioned. It's a great point that you told me before when we were talking about toolboxes, that everybody has the same and we use them differently and we have different paths. It's kind of like borrowing somebody's clothes and wearing their clothes. Like, it just doesn't feel right. And maybe
Mm.
you'll be able to like put together an outfit for two, but you can't really like make it work long term or build your own closet with their clothes. And so I do think that there is a narrative that people portray or that is bought into, that somebody else has the blueprint or framework and they market to that because they see that it's selling, when they blueprint to, or they market to the fact that they have the answers and they have the formula and it's been proven again and again. But I am of the very strong belief that every single person, as floofy as that sounds, has been put onto this earth for a special mission and for a special purpose. And so all it does when you buy into somebody telling you that they have the way to see success is it robs you of the journey of being able to explore what you were really meant to do. And I think I even
Mm.
had that experience of like borrowing other people's ways for so long, and it took a while for me to come back home. And so I'm grateful like I found you and did certain things in my life this past year to even recenter myself and come back home, because that was a really hard thing to go through. And it will feel good in the moment when you're like making sales or you're winning and you like send the Slack message and they post it on their story. But all you'll feel later in the
Yeah.
line when you are no longer working with that coach, or where you're sitting alone and you're left with the business, is this isn't me. And it's a sucky feeling to have, but I want to say that if anybody feels that, it's an empowering thing, because awareness is the first step. And when you become aware of it, that's when you can change the pattern.
And I love that you ended on awareness, because awareness is also, and I've talked about this in other episodes, like once, and Jazz and I could riff on this for another hour, but when you see something in your business, you'll never unsee. So that's the other thing when she says awareness is the first step, just to expand on that. When you see something that doesn't fit in your business anymore, it will continue to show up, and it will continue in the frequency and the intensity of which it shows up until you address it. And so when she says awareness is the first step, when you become aware, that's an invitation for you to do something about it. If you're aware you don't love your offer, if you're aware that maybe your team dynamic's not working, if you're aware that your marketing kind of doesn't really feel like you, but it is getting results, so it feels a little confusing. If you're aware that a certain dynamic or a friendship or a relationship or maybe a mentor that you're working with doesn't feel quote unquote aligned, to Jazz's point of home, I love that, because that's how it felt in my business. Like, I finally, for the first time in a very long time, feel at home in my business in a way that I really haven't been for years, even though in those years I had massive success on what would consider to be like financially and all of these other aspects. In me, the success wasn't there, because it was a matter of the fact, again, that I didn't feel as safe and secure and excited and calm and present and centered as I do now. And so I love all of that just so much. I also feel like, guys, as we told you at the beginning, we can go for like 3-4 hours. Like, there's
Yeah,
definitely,
you said
when
four
we are in
things, and I was
person,
like,
this is
okay.
basically,
I was like, okay, shut up. we have to put a pin in it, because I could have responded to that for another hour too and asked you 4 questions. So
yeah. No, we can just keep going and going and going. So maybe we'll have to do a part 2, Jazz. But thank you so much for today. Like, I feel like today it was such a good conversation. There were so many pieces and nuggets here for anybody who feels like they either are not aligned in their business or seeking deeper alignment in what they're doing. And so obviously, I am sure, and you guys listening to Jazz, you're like, okay, like, I want to consume all of her things. Where can somebody find you? Where can someone dive into just like hearing more of all of your goodness and wisdom?
my Instagram is at Jasmine Sawaged, which I'm sure will be somewhere. But I don't have a website because, as Kate knows, we've operated for a long time without websites, and it's been fine. But now I
Yeah.
kind of wish I have one. It's under construction, so we're getting there. So yeah, my Instagram's at Jasmine Sawaged. That's like the best place to DM me, even if you just want to say, "Hey, have a question," or "Loved this," or "I hated what you said about that because it triggered me." DM me it. let's chat. Or if you're like, I don't think I poop on social media, let's talk about it. Let's show people that you poop. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what she does, guys. She did it for me. She did it for me. And just for everyone who's going to be looking for her, because I know you're going to be looking it up, it is Jasmine, Jasmine. And the last name is Sawaged. And so if you want to look her up on Instagram, highly recommend. Go consume her stuff. This is like everything today is just jazz 24/7, by the way. This is not podcast jazz. It's just jazz Monday to Friday, Sunday morning, Saturday night, doesn't matter. This is just like basically what our conversations are when we don't have microphones in front of us. And so also please make sure to just shoot Jazz a note on Instagram. Like if there's something that you feel like really landed for you, maybe something that came through as an awareness for you, something that, you know, she shared or I shared that really allowed you to get clarity. One of the best things that, again, as to Jazz's note earlier, that can be really impactful is when you have awareness or when you have learnings to be quote unquote witnessed in that. And what that means is when you state it to somebody else or you share it to somebody else, it really allows the impact of that and the compound of what you just did to really be solidified, to really be rooted in something. And so if you have an awareness, take a second right now, just center into maybe like a light bulb that happened for you, a download that happened for you, or maybe even an action you're going to take, and feel free to reach out to her, because one of the, you know, most impactful things that you can do is be witnessing your clarity, not just having it. So all of that to be said, thank you so much, Jazz, for coming on today. It was so good. As always, you guys, thank you so much for listening. And we will be having probably Jazz back for a part 2 at some point down the line, because there's so much more to unpack here. So thank you so much, Jazz, for coming on. And as always, you guys, we will see you next week. And all that being said, as always, stay ambitious.